This
entire
conference
presentation.
will now be recorded.
All right, thank you. So during the course of this presentation, if at any point of time you feel that any of us is not audible, if you're having any difficulties viewing the screen, just let us know in the chat so that we can accordingly rectify the problem. Okay, so all five of us will be starting this session. Let's move on to the next slide.
Sure.
Great. So I think all of you might be in a position right now where you have your summers coming up and you would be considering applying for different positions, internship positions, be it for research positions or at a corporate firm. And a major step in applying for any of these internships is preparing a decent resume that reflects your skills and qualities well and is aligned with the position that you're applying for. So in designing a resume, I think there are two main challenges that you might be facing. First is to decide the content that you wish to put on your resume and how to prioritize that content based on your skills as well as the position that you wish to apply for. And the second is how to frame the work that you've done in a way that seems impressive to the recruiter. So I think in keeping that in mind, we have organized the session to kind of elevate or reduce the stress of preparing a decent resume. So we'll be walking you through different steps of preparing a nice resume, as well as sharing some sample resume with you. And I think this meme kind of aptly captures the situation all of you are in right now. I think all of you must be in your first or your second years, and you would have a very less content to actually put on that one-page resume. So I think the situation of Alex would seem very familiar to all of you. Yeah, let's move on to the next slide. All right. So in the course of this 1 hour long session, we'll be covering 5 main points. First is what is the resume, where we will be introducing to you this document called a resume, and what are the basic and give you a basic understanding of the resume. We'll be walking you through 5 steps to actually help you prepare that resume from scratch. We'll be sharing some sample resume of the panelists here to guide you through the major sections of a resume so that you can take inspiration from that. We'll be also showing you sample resume that are tailored to different profiles, because if you're applying for a research position, the resume for that will look very different from if you're applying for a consulting position or if you're applying for a coding position. So we'll be giving you a sample resume of different profiles. Then last but not the least, we'll be covering some doubts and misconceptions that all of us had when we were in your shoes, as well as some doubts and misconceptions that were raised in the previous sessions that some of us have taken on the same topic. And lastly, one of us will just summarize what all was covered in this entire session. Next slide. All right. So I think many of you would already be familiar with what is a resume. For those of you who are not, a resume is basically a 1 or 2 page document that helps to succinctly put all your skills and experiences and show them in front of an interviewer where you're applying for a position. Now, typically, a resume serves two purposes. First, it shows your interest in that position, as well as it shows your skills and competencies that you're fit to fill in that position that you're applying for. So if you draw an analogy, just like you have a product, and in order to actually sell that product, you need a brochure or you need an advertisement so that consumers are attracted in that product. Similarly, a resume is a way to market or sell yourself to the recruiter. And so that is the purpose a resume has to that the resume fills to serve. Next slide. Right. So I'll just walk you through what are the basics of a resume. Right. So the resume contains your basic details so that your recruiter can easily contact you and has a preliminary idea about your basic background, whether you're from an engineering background, what kind of college you come from, what city you come from, etc. Then it talks about your academic achievements, which includes your GPA, courses which are relevant to the position you're applying for, your JE rank, your JE marks, if you've received any scholastic accolades that you wish to mention in your resume. It also includes your positions of responsibility, and this becomes of paramount importance if you're applying for leadership positions or if you're applying for consulting positions which value positions of responsibility. It also includes project information, which is important if you're applying for research positions as well as for any technical role, and if you have done projects that are relevant to the technical role you're applying to. And last but not the least, it contains extracurricular activities as well as awards that you might have won and that show your competency in a particular field. So in terms of optimizing for putting this content, the problem is that the recruiter only has about 2 minutes or even less than that to browse through your resume. So you have to make sure that you portray all the important information in a very short period of time so that he can easily read through that, as well as communicate the important points succinctly. So in this case, I think there are two major points that you need to think of. First is that whatever skills you mention, they should be relevant to the position you're applying for. So for example, if you're applying for a coding position, then mentioning that you were, HEC in your hall, maybe it's not very relevant compared to, probably mentioning some research project or some programming club project that you did. So it's very important to make sure that whatever stuff you mention on your resume is relevant to the position you're applying for, and always try to play it to your strengths. And secondly, you have to make sure that in terms of formatting, in terms of language, in terms of the way you're presenting your entire information on the resume, it's legible to the interviewer, it's impressive, because you're competing with a lot of people. So if the interviewer finds that the formatting is off, or it's very difficult to read stuff, he can easily skip that resume and move on to the next one, and you want to avoid that situation. So you have to make sure that the language, the formatting, the design, everything is top notch, and you are able to compete at the level with other participants. Next slide. Right. So in terms of the making of a resume, let's say once you have decided the content that you wish to put and you prioritize on the content, how you put that content becomes of paramount importance. Because I think at this level, you will have very few things to put on a resume. So the way you write those things becomes very important in order to get that position you're applying for. So I think this meme kind of succinctly captures the gist of what I'm trying to say. The activity that this girl did is basically playing on a beach, but the way she mentioned it seems very impressive and doesn't directly communicate something as simple as playing on a beach. So even if you've done something that you feel is not very impressive, or if you feel something is not very relevant to the position that you're applying for, let's say all of you might have done a TA project, right? And if you are applying for a research position in mechanical or material science or something that is related to the TA project, the TA project might not seem very important or might not seem very impressive to you. But if you're able to write it in an impressive way, then you might be able to convince the recruiter to give you a chance. So I think the way you write it is also very important. Or let someone mention that there is no TA project for Y19. So that's just sad. Okay, next slide. All right, so now we'll walk you through 5 steps towards preparing a resume. So the first step is basically to analyze yourself, and this has two facets. The first is to decide what position you're actually applying for, whether it is aligned with your interests or not. So make sure that you prioritize your interests, because you're at the stage where you're exploring stuff. And the second is to make sure that you play to your strengths and you actually mention the skills that you believe are aligned with your interests as well as aligned with the position that you're applying for. Next. Right. So there are some important aspects that you should consider, right? So first is you discuss with your seniors, because if you're applying for a position that a senior has already applied for and got through, then he would have a good idea that what recruiters are looking for, right? So that saves you a lot of trouble. So I would feel that if you're applying for a research position, then try to talk to seniors who have done research internships, who have done internships at labs that are similar to the field that you wish to work for. If you're applying at a startup, then talk to seniors who have interned at a startup so they know that what startup hiring managers look for in a resume. Next is to be proactive and make sure that whatever resume you make, it's curated as per the profile you're applying for. So in many cases, some companies, they have specific format in which they wish to receive a resume. And if you just skip that, and if you have prepared just one resume that you send to all companies, then you might miss out on that position, because the company was expecting a certain format which you don't have. So try to do some research for whichever position you're applying for. Try to talk to people, either seniors or people who are working there, to make sure that your resume is curated as per the profile you're applying for. Lastly, make sure that whatever information you put on your resume, it's reliable and it's correct. In many companies, the resume, it's there registered in the database and it stays there for life. So let's say if for some reasons, if you're desperate to get a position and you write something that is not correct, and later on the company finds out, then it might have repercussions for you that you don't wish to have right now. So try to make sure that you're 100% honest in whatever you write on your resume. Don't try to boast a lot. Make sure you stick to the facts, because all of these facts will remain with that company. You actually blacklisting yourself if you falsify information. Next. Right. So this is an example of how you can put stuff on your resume. So let's say the activity is a hostel debating secretary. So when you write about this activity, try to think of two aspects. First is what is the task you did, and second is what skills did you learn through the task that is reflected if you mention the task in your resume. And ensure that given that you have very limited space, so in order to maximize what you extract from that section of the resume, try to make sure that every line you write reflects a different skill set, a novel skill set that has not been reflected before. So for example, in this case, the activity is hostel debating secretary. The person conducted inter-hostel events for the first time. This is the activity, and the skills reflected are responsibility, enthusiasm to start new trends, pick new talent, etc. So as you can see, in all these different activities, they've mentioned what tasks they did, as well as what a relevant skill set it reflects. And then you can perhaps, once you write this down, you can see that, okay, if I'm applying for a certain company, which perhaps appreciates responsibility, which appreciates teamwork, which appreciates dedication, then you will mention those points accordingly. So you can actually curate your points based on the position you're applying for. Then this is a very nice template that you can actually adopt for yourself while you're mentioning the different activities on your resume and applying for a position. Next. Yeah, over to Anirudh.
Hello, thank you, Tushar. Right. So by now you have a decent idea of what a resume is about and what the higher level approach towards a resume is, right? So now in this section, we'll talk about how to exactly start putting stuff on your resume and where do you start, how do you start it. So it can be a very daunting process to approach it. You don't know how to start, right? The first thing that you should then do is try to prepare a master resume for yourself. And your SPO and many other places would actually require you to give a master resume so that it's easy for them to compile all your points, right? So what is this master resume and how do you make it? Think of master resume as a superset of everything that you want to be on any resume, right? So the way you go about making it is that first you enlist all the activities that you have kind of done in your entire life. So this sounds daunting, sure, but if you start to do it, you'll find that it doesn't take a lot of time. So start from school, right? Don't undermine anything that you have done, even at the school level. You start from your academic achievements. Okay, what was my academic performance in 10th and 12th? What was my performance in, say, Olympiads, NTSC, KVPY, other Olympiads that you know? And obviously, what was my JE rank and other such achievements which you might have at the school level. For most people, this does not take a lot of time. Most of us have not done a lot of things in school. So don't worry if you don't have anything so far. Then you come to your college experiences, right? And that is when you typically have a lot more things. Many examples are here. You can get things like, say, what was my CPI? What are the courses that I've done? What are the projects have I done? What are the internships that I might have done? And apart from that, what are, say, positions of responsibility that I've taken? Even if it's not like a particular POR, if I've done work in any club or any body of campus, what is it? Like, just be broad-minded here and just enlist everything that you know about yourself, right? How you spend your time, etc. So once you've listed everything down, the next step would be to segment them and rank them, right? So what are the segments which I'm talking about here? Next speakers will go into that in depth, but broadly you can think of it like the first segment would be academics in general. So everything that comes under academics from school to college, you'll write it there. The next segment would be, say, projects and internships. Broadly speaking, let's call it work experience. So your projects and internships would go there. Then there'll be a segment for your positions of responsibility. Anything that you do in clubs on campus, etc., would go there. Lastly, there can be another segment for your extracurricular activities, hobbies, etc., which don't really fit in anything else that you've done so far. So once you've segmented these activities, then it's time to rank them, right? And often it's very evident what this ranking is. For example, PORs have an intrinsic hierarchy within them, so you know which is a better one. In projects, say, typically things that you've done later in your academic life are more complex, generally speaking. So they are of a higher importance, of a higher ranking. So once you've ranked them, now you know how you've fared in different segments that are going to appear on your resume, right? So this will serve like a dual purpose. Firstly, you get to know what your strengths and weaknesses are and what are the chinks that you need to fill in your resume, so you can kind of plan future activities also. But for the purpose of making the resume, you kind of get a sense of what the segments are going to be. So this compilation in this ranking order would be your master resume. Next slide, please. Right. So now that you have your master resume, the next thing you want to do is make specific resumes for different kind of jobs, right? Tushar mentioned this earlier, that different kind of job roles would require the highlighting of different sort of points. So one thing that's very important here, and I'd highlight this especially because most people don't know enough about different kind of roles that exist, is actually getting to know what these roles want, right? So it's very important to not assume that every role requires for a certain kind of skill set. So for example, not every tech role would require, say, machine learning, or like not everybody would require, say, web development. So it's important to talk to seniors, talk to people in those fields, and get to know what is it that these fields are looking for, right? So that you can highlight the important aspects of your resume when applying for them. This slide has a lot of such aspects which are required in these kind of roles. You can go through these later. And this next slide, please. And this is that it's very important to really pick your points specifically for the role that you're applying for, or else it's essentially no use, right? So more on this later. Next slide, please. Right. So now when you start to prepare your specific resumes, it's typical for resumes in the corporate field, in startups, etc., to be of one page, right? Companies generally ask for a one-page resume. They don't have that much time to read everything that you've done in your life, and like your master resume, a three-page sheet. They don't have time for that. Often, like the first level of shortlisting is done very, very soon. So it's important to appear very impressive as soon as possible, right? And a very important thing that I'd want to highlight here is that a resume is not a document that is set in stone, right? There is no correct format for a resume. There is no rules which, if you break, then there's an automatic reject, right? Sure, there are like a few hygiene checks. You can't have a colorful resume, etc. But essentially, what you want to do is maximize impact and maximize how impressive you look, right? So there are a lot of things that you can play around with to like maximize that. You can switch segments. For example, if you have done more impressive things in your positions of responsibility than in, say, your academic projects, you can bump up that section and talk like in more detail about it, right? So that's one thing that you should take away, is that there is a lot of flexibility within the resume, and you should try to maximize the impact that that can be given through your one-page resume, right? Next slide, please. So apart from the ordering of sections, another very important thing to maximize impact and how professional you look is like adhering to a few formatting guidelines. This slide has a very comprehensive list of things that you should adhere to. Things like, say, font size. It should definitely not be smaller than size 9. It should also not be as large as, say, size 13 or 14. So there is like a font size that you should adhere to. It should be good enough to fit in one page roughly, but it should also be at the same time legible. There are preferred fonts. You don't use funky fonts on a resume. You don't use funky colors, etc. And there are many things that you should read on this slide when we send it to you, because you'll forget things. But three things that I want to highlight particularly, because these are places where I've seen people commit mistakes, are firstly grammar, right? Every rule of grammar that exists in the English language also applies to a resume. So you don't capitalize random words inside the resume. You don't like make random grammatical errors, and you don't get away with it simply because it's a resume, right? So always be very thorough with what kind of errors you do and how you form sentences. The second thing is making certain words bold, right? People commit mistakes on both sides of the spectrum here. So sometimes people don't make anything bold and it's like a plain sheet, and sometimes people just make things bold for the sake of doing it. The purpose of making things bold is to just is very simple, just to get more attention on that fact, right? And hence you should make the impressive parts of your resume bolder. So if you have an impressive CPI, then maybe you should bold in that. If you have an impressive POR, then you can bold in that. Or if there is any particular impact point, then you can bold in that. But don't do it for the sake of it. Also, don't like not do it at all, because that will just make for a very plain resume, right? The last thing would be length of sentences. I have often seen sentences that are extremely short or too long on present on resumes, right? And while it's fine to do it on a master resume, because that's like the rough version, you should take care of this fact that no sentence should be, say, less than half half the width of the page, or no sentence should be flowing over to the second line with only a couple of words, right? So try to restrict the sentences to 75% of the line. So these are things that you have to take into account. It's also present in the slide, and I'll advise you to go over it when you're actually being. Next slide, please. Right, language. And I'd encourage you to like pay special attention to this, because this is one of the more difficult aspects to get right. In general, people just write uh, sentences on a resume just like they would describe anything else, right? But there is a very specific way of writing things on a resume to maximize impact and to appear professional. So the first thing, and like the less intuitive thing, is the use of certain kinds of tense and certain action verbs. And the idea here is that firstly, you don't talk too much in present continuous or future tense, right? You don't start writing things that you have not done, or what you plan to do in the future, or what you're currently doing. People are more interested in what you have already done. So I'd advise you to start with that and like talk about things that you've already done, achieved, right? And one way to do it more effectively is to use certain common action verbs. A lot of the examples are written here. These verbs essentially convey this idea that you successfully like did a task, you were very efficient with it, and it's very typical to use these words. Apart from that, there are also a few hygiene checks. Things like, say, spelling and punctuation. Definitely don't get that wrong. It will be very unprofessional, and there's literally no reason to not be thorough with your resume. The length of sentences is something that I've talked about. Another thing that I'd like to mention here is the use of vocabulary. So definitely like avoid slang language, avoid jargon. Don't write things which nobody knows what it is, right? So if you have done some sort of very technically involved project, try to use as little jargon as possible so that people understand it and it's more impactful, right? Also, finally, keep it very simple. There is no need to like use a very complicated vocabulary here. No need to use a thesaurus dictionary. Use very simple words so that people get it and can understand what you're trying to say, right? Next slide, please. Yeah, a couple of more finer points on the use of language. Um, don't use first person or I or any pronouns in your sentences, right? You kind of start with an active voice with the action verb. So I organized a certain event for ESL with 200 students, or I like not I uh, spearheaded a team and achieved a certain task, etc. It's important to be honest and accurate, but like not overly modest. It's you are essentially selling yourself on the resume, and you have to strike a right balance between sounding impressive but not sounding self-flattering. So avoid use of very accentuating adverbs like highly skilled, I was excellent, I was outstanding, but definitely write things like got a letter of recommendation from the guide for effective contribution, etc., and try to convey in simple terms that you did a good job, because that's what the resume is all about. Next slide, please. Right. So three things that I want to convey from this slide. Firstly, you have to iterate your resume to improve it, right? The first version, the master version, will be the most rough one. When you even go onto the one-page resume, the first version is not going to be the best. So you have to iterate, you have to make it better through reviews, through feedback, and that's how you'll get to the best resume. I'm sure like all of us, all the 5 speakers have done multiple iterations on their final resume, and it was a very daunting task, but you have to do it if you have to compete with every other resume out there, right? The second thing is to maximize impact through other typical ways, which is to quantify your contribution. It's always like anybody can come up here and say that, okay, I did a great job with my POR or with my internship, but if you can quantify your contribution, that's so much more credible. So try to like quantify everything. If you had a POR, for example, try to write how much growth did the club see in terms of, say, the number of members, in terms of the budget, in terms of, say, online presence, etc. Whatever relevant metrics exist for your activity, try to quantify it. It's easier in technical projects because you have simpler metrics like accuracy and whatnot. but try to do it in whatever field you're writing for. Finally, in multiple iterations, you'll find some typical ways to shorten the length of sentences to make it more impactful by, say, removing adverbs, removing needless adjectives, and yeah, in general, trying to shorten things. So if you can't do it in the first turn, it's not a problem. You always make multiple iterations on the resume. Next slide, please. Yeah. So in this last slide, I would like to emphasize the importance of getting your resume reviewed by a very credible person. So these credible people can be, in general, seniors who have experience in the firms that you're applying for, some friends or peers whom you think are capable enough to judge your resume well, and if any family members can help you, but often you find that it can be biased to get help from family members. So if you have something who can help you there, then awesome. And finally, it's very important to know everything that goes on your resume, right? Because like the goal of the resume is to get you into an interview, and inside the interview you will be expected to know everything that's on your resume. You will be expected to defend anything that you've written there, and hence it's very important to be thorough with whatever numbers that you put up there, whatever terms you put up there. So it's important to like revise it before the interview. So this is all for this section. Handing on to the next speaker.
So I'll take over from here. Thank you, Anirudh. So as Anirudh and Tushar told you about like what are the basic things to look after in a resume when you are making a resume. So now I'll make you go through a sample resume wherein you can see all the things in action, and you can see how those points come up in a real resume, right? So like this is a sample resume from one of our alums. So you can see here that the top section of a resume generally contains basics about the personal information. Then we have the educational qualifications just up below that, followed by the academic achievements or the scholastic achievements, whatever you call it. Then you generally have a section for internships and projects. Then you keep a section for position of responsibilities. And then mostly we have the extracurriculars in a resume. So this is a template which is mostly followed in ITK itself, and you can obviously go to the internet and see like different varieties of resumes and like whatnot diversities are there. But this is like generally the template which people follows. So we are going to show like that itself. Yeah. So yep. So in the personal information, we generally keep the IITK mail ID and a contact number. People also tend to sometimes include their LinkedIn handle, etc., or their GitHub repositories. But it's totally up to you, like what is relevant for that particular profile, right? And here in this resume, there is the guy hasn't specified his year of basically graduation. So people tend to also write basically like third year undergraduate chemical engineering, something like that below the name itself. So that gives a basic intro, like what is your academic year and what is your department of specialization. So you can include that as well. Going over to the education qualifications. So generally in a resume, we try to sum up like all the academic milestones which we have up till now in ITK itself. So we tend to include the 10th board percentage, 12th board percentage, and your current CPI. So try to keep it in a tabular format. It seems more legible, and like mostly like since majority of a batch would be putting in this format, so it would be easier for the recruiter to identify, right? And if you have, let's say, a good CPI, or maybe like if you want to, how should I say it? If you want the recruiter to notice your CPI in the first place, so you can bold in itself, like Anirudh told previously. So yeah. So now for the scholastic achievements part. So this section majorly involves like what all awards you have won in the academic domain, or what are the scholarships if you uh, if you have any. And apart from that, you can also write your JE ranks, or like if you have qualified any Olympiads, or maybe any academic award that you might have won in your school itself. So this section is particularly for all those types of achievements. Yep. And yeah, if you can also include particular publications if you have published on any particular topic. You can. So this section is highly used for citing publications. Yep. So now moving over to the internships or the projects part. So this is like the most important part of your resume. If if we talk from the perspective of a recruiter, because like 90% or 80% of your resume, sorry, 90% or 80% of your interview would revolve around internships or the projects that you have done. So like in this, try to keep up like all the important points that you have maybe done in that project. Like maybe you could include some of the basic procedures that you might have followed, like what is the what was the objective of the project, what was the end result, and if there is some sort of an achievement or some sort of impact that you might have created. So try to include on those lines. Like you can see itself, if we talk about like the Schlumberger intern here. So therein the guy has given 5 points here. So the first point is mostly on the objective part. So that is the streamlining the process of testing and inspection of treating irons. Then he has summarized like what was his approach that he has followed for executing that particular objective. And then finally, he has concluded with the result that he obtained from that particular project. So this particular hierarchy gives a good flow to the reader, and it seems very much organized on his part. So try to keep your projects following this particular hierarchy of objective, approach, and results. So yep. So then moving on to the position and responsibility part. So this generally conveys your leadership roles that you have taken in your uh, campus or before in your school itself. So herein, mostly people try to convey all the initiatives that they have taken up and the impacts that they have uh, tried to produce from that position. So as you can see, like in this particular section, the resume has all the figures, and it's a very number intensive section, and all the important figures are bolded as well. So that would catch the eye of the recruiter, as as the numbers are more important if you talk about a particular position responsibility. So like mostly numbers are there, and then all the initiatives and like what was the impact that particular guy had achieved. So this section summarizes that part. Then we have at the end a section for extra currics. So generally this section isn't verified uh, by the placement committee. So herein it's ECL, otherwise it could be SPO itself. So in extra currics, you try to give a flavor of all the diverse type of activities you have done apart from your academics. So generally people try to include all the cultural activities that they might have done, or like whatever inter-hostel activities or activities like inter-IIT. So people try to summarize them in the extra currics part. So herein, bolding also becomes a little more important as you try to keep the emphasis on particular, like whether if you have won a gold medal in that or something like that. So yeah. So apart from that, like you can also see a section for a social initiative in this resume. So there could be sections like this if it is something that is standing out for your profile and does not fits into any of the regular sections like internships, POR, or extracurriculars. You can keep different sections like maybe social initiative, or if you have a startup of your own, so you can also have a section like an entrepreneurial experience section or something like that. So you can customize these sections as per your resume and your profile, but so try to fix an order for these sections based upon the job you are applying to. So yeah. So just before moving on, I would request Yash to share the resume so we can also have a look on his resume for his internship.
Yeah, sure. Just a second. Yeah, I'm not the presenter right now. Uday, can you make me the presenter? Yeah, is my screen visible now?
Yep, it is visible.
Okay,
Sure.
right.
So herein we will be showing you like few variants of the same essential resume. So you can see like what is the subtleties between different resumes for different profiles. So yes, if you could just go through your resume once.
Yeah, just a second. Sorry, there's some issue with my laptop right now. If someone else can present it. Like right now, what we can do is that we can move forward with Vatsalya, your section, and then we can just go through my resume after that.
Yeah, sure.
Sure, if that works.
Yeah.
So I think Saksham would have to share the screen again.
Yeah. I also have to have the rights for the presenter. I don't have them right now. Shashank, if you could just make me the presenter again. Yep.
Sure, could you move on to the previous slide for a sec? Yeah, sure. So thank you, Saksham, and all the other presenters as well. So we've talked about what exactly would comprise in a resume, different sections that you can put in, and the different steps that you can take in order to build a resume that's worthwhile for the job opportunity or the research opportunity that you're looking for. Now I'll just guide you through some sort of sample resumes in order to show how the growth of a resume looks like in a timescale basis, the kind of common mistakes that one would encounter while making a resume and how to fix them, and what are the different methods to realize those mistakes and then fix them, and certain stuff as well. So moving on to the next slide. Yeah. So it's just a brief example of, say, a position of actual coordinator of Antaragni. And the illustration shows how different iterations in time would result in a different resume altogether, and how could you present the points in a fashion that's uh, that sounds very effective and looks very effective for the content that's being covered. So if you could see, the first version would just say that you've headed a 40-member managerial team and you were responsible for the annual cultural festival. Then there's a second point which also mentions something about the team itself, leading a three-tier team of 400 student volunteers. And then it goes on to talk about bringing the Antaragni road trip to a truly national level, visiting these many cities and kind of things. So basically, the idea you get is that there could be a lot of potential in terms of quantitative data that you can present. And subsequently, when you look at the fourth version, which is the second block of text you see here, it's quite refined in terms of not being cluttered and presenting the points in a very concise fashion. So you can sum up the first 2 points and write a single point that comprises of the team structure, heading a 3-tier team and 14 core group members, and effectively managing different sort of budgets among them. You can also highlight some interesting things that did not happen in the previous iteration, but was something new, and you brought them up, and that is something that the recruiter is also looking for, some sort of initiative that's being driven from you. So as you can see, the author would has written something like grant patronage by the United Nations for the first time, and also wrote about the road trip in a different fashion, which is more appealing and sounds more effective. And as you can see in the third block of text, which is the sixth version, uh, it looks in the best possible format for that particular role or position, or it could be anything as well. But you can see that the idea here is that the quantitative data is in a very structured format, and you get the points in a very crisp fashion, which not just help you to bring out the best out of the role that was expected and delivered by you, but also allows you a certain freedom of extension of your own ideas in order to bring out something that's very useful for the role that you're applying for. So if you can see on the last section, it also has talked about increasing prize money on a year-on-year basis and providing incentives, which is also necessary in a sense that since you've concised the format of the previous text, you are able to bring in more information in the same amount of space. And that's beneficial for you in that way. So moving on to the next slide. Right. So for technical projects and seminars, there are certain guidelines about it. Most people would want to write something regarding these aspects in their resumes, and hence the do's and don'ts follow. So just to going through the points once, the do's would include the title, advisor's name, and the duration of the project in itself. You would have to describe the goals and the approach in brief and the deliverables of the project. Now, this is necessary because the recruiter, on the other hand, would not really essentially be knowing of the stuff that you've done and or was expected of you from the project itself. So the third point that lays it out was that you need to focus on the key outcomes of the project and your role in bringing them, because it's essentially the resume would be for you yourself and not for the entire research group that's being presented to, say, any recruiter. So in that case, you need to bring out the key outcomes that came out of the project and what was your role in bringing them out. And obviously, you'll love to highlight publications that resulted from the project itself. Now, certain don'ts would involve that you don't put out the entire abstract, thesis abstract, or any sort of complicated information in order to describe the project, because that will not just take up space on your resume, but also make the recruiter disinterested in the whole process, because he or she might not be knowing entirety of that thing. And hence, the second point also follows that you need to tone down the technical details in order to make it more accessible for the recruiter to understand. So just a small example that's being given here on the slide. The author or the person for who's written this resume has really put it out really in a great fashion, talking about the title, what was the guide, and what was the main goal, and what were the challenges that he or she had faced in the process, and what all implementation was done from their end. And you can see that follows for all the three projects that he or she undertook. So next slide, please. Right. So I'll just talk briefly about the common mistakes that one would encounter. It's just a small example. You see that there are certain points under the scholastic achievements and awards section, as Saksham had pointed out in the previous resume as well. So the person has written about a national certification awarded. So it could be a fact that the said thing is not a great achievement in terms of something that you can pay for, or something that could be done by lots of people. And if at all the recruiter would knows about that stuff, then it adds a disadvantage to your resume. So you would not want to put on something in the achievement section if it's not really an achievement. Right. And so one of the things is that the said person has written about Daulatram something scholarship by Saidi Delhi, but there is no information about what is it awarded for, or what percentile of people are being awarded by the said scholarship. They've also written about something called a scholar card, but there is also no information about what a scholar's card really is. And so these are some nitty-gritties about a resume which would make your recruiter disinterested, because primarily because of the fact that he or she doesn't know what it really stands for. Even in for the second block of text, the said person has written about a major project, but it's very detailed and highly technical, and it does not really reflect what the said person would have done, achieved out of that project. And I mean, it's not very concise, and also, as I said before, would make the interview or the recruiter disinterested in the whole process, because they would not be able to understand. Right. Next slide, please.
I would like to add one thing here. So you can also see here that the action word that is used is very much repetitive in the same section, like it is awarded for every section. So you could also think over to use a different action word and try not to repeat the same action word in a section more than once. So
Right, that's absolutely correct. And in this case, you might also want to cut short on some points if there are no alternative action words and there's a lot of points. Then you would also think about keeping the best out of them
right.
if you have to cut down space. Yeah. Next slide,
And
please.
just one more thing, I think here in this particular resume, and I think it has not been covered in the session up till now, try to keep the length of your points to a single line itself. Don't try to make it a double line or a triple line point until unless it is very important, because it seems a little off from the formatting aspect.
Right. So as Saksham was talking about, on the right side, you can see an example which talks about initiatives and achievements, and the block of text is arranged in such a fashion a lot of white space is wasted, and you have to cramp up the content on the right side of the on your resume. So one of the alternative ways would be to make headings for these kind of text and then lay out the entirety of the text in a similar fashion, and not make separate vertical blocks of or columns of text. Another point that is highlighted over here is that there is some sub-bulleted content inside of. So someone is did an internship or some job at ITC, and they worked on implementing 3 new models of distribution. But since they've already talked about distribution, the latter point is somewhat sub-bulleted content, and naturally they should have had a smaller font for that size, because it doesn't really make much aesthetic sense in terms of writing this with the same font size. So the next point is that the person has talked about his or her positions of responsibilities in terms of hospital counselor, coordinator, or member of this organizing committee or anything like that. But they've not really used bullets to make it more appealing in terms of the content that's being displayed in the resume. And as Saksham said before, they've used multiple lines for the same point, even if it's what was not required at this point of time or this particular section, because you could have adjusted the space on the previous line itself to reduce the, or to make sure that the 2003 that is in the next line comes in the same line as well. So these are some kind of common mistakes that you would encounter while making your resume. And as I said before, that different iterations of your resume would ensure that these kind of mistakes are understood and realized and corrected as well while different iterations as they proceed. So next slide, please. Yeah, so I mean, some of the points you would realize by talking to seniors or just looking at yourself that and should not be written in your resume, because they don't really make sense. Because say, for example, you've written what an A grade 10 out of 10 for the BTech final year project. There is no information about what that project was it a certain course, how long you did it for, and just writing an A grade would make sense for that. Someone has written they were an Indian citizen, or they are an Indian citizen, cricket enthusiast, played Indian classical instrument. Doesn't really make much sense. What instrument are you talking about? How fluent are you in? These are some topics that you could bring out during an interview, if at all the interviewer asks for your hobbies or interest. But certainly, if you write them down in a resume, don't really make much of meaningful thought. someone has written about scholar throughout the span of schooling, it could be a possibility that there is some sort of award or recognition for being a scholar in the school. You could have written that down instead of writing in much more ambiguous terms that may lead the interviewer thinking that you're some sort of a narcissist. But anyway, these are some sort of common mistakes that you should look for, and it could only be solved in an iterative process. Right. Yeah, sure. So for the doubts and queries, I'll hand it over to Yash.
Yeah, hi everyone, it's Yash Maheshwari here. So, like, firstly, clearing out any common misconceptions that we have had, like, seen previously. So, firstly, people think that recruiters don't know which activities on campus are really worthwhile, or like if you just write something that you have not done in the position, like, let's say you are writing a position of responsibility and you have written something which is not under that position, or if you have done some project but it is not related to that. So keep this in mind that most firms that recruit people from IITs have IITK alumni who are up to date with campus trends there. So every firm that is recruiting will have someone from any IIT or IITK specifically to look into these resumes. Second is that mediocre PT or project work can be exaggerated to make it impressive. So recruiters actually know what to ask you to figure it out. Like if you have let's say if we are saying just in the resume shortlist, if you have exaggerated it and it looks pretty good, you will get through the shortlist. But then when the actual interview comes, when you are grilled on your resume, then if the recruiter asks something from your resume and then you are not able to answer it, then it would look really bad, because it would reflect that you actually don't know what you have done, and thus it would imply that you actually haven't done that thing. Next, the thing is like NCFM pass and like certification of these kinds of certifications. So again, like people who are recruiting are aware of the level of certifications that are there. So for an example, NCFM is like being a volunteer, and like it can't help you to get a job actually. So similarly, we would have like Coursera certifications or things like that. People know that these are pretty easy to get and actually don't hold much value if you also if you write this in your resume that it is of great value. It will not work. Then it's like I must mention all the events I participated in to show enthusiasm. So actually your resume is not about like what all have you done in your stay at ITK. You would have done many things, but it's about what you have excelled in or what you have done which is apart, like stands apart from other people that are with you right now in ITK. So like participation, and like if you did not win, then it doesn't matter actually. So you should only put your achievements, or if something is really great about all of the things that you have done. And next slide please. Right, so here are some FAQs. So many people would have this question like, how do I justify low CPI? So like definitely CPI is important, but if now you are right, if you are making your resume, it can't be helped, right? So actually it's not everything. If you can prove to the recruiter that your time, which actually like uh, you are not able to give to academics and not to your CPI, you should prove to the recruiter that the time that you have spent in other activities was worthwhile, and you actually did something credible, and like you did something that was good and would influence the recruiter to actually hire you, right? So this is what matters, that you would have to prove that all the time that you have spent in ITK while your stay is worthwhile. Next is like, how technical should the language or terminology be? Then it's just like that, like it totally depends on the recruiter. If you are, let's say, going into a core company, then the technology then the technical language should be used. You can use words that sound too much technical which other people would not recognize. But let's say if you go to a non-core field and you are writing a project which is a technical project in there, you would have to water down the terminology there, right? And again, like avoid ITK specific terms that the recruiters might not be familiar with. Next is like, which course project should I include? Again, so here like there would be course projects in many courses, but you should only include those in which you actually achieved something, or it was somewhat unique that was not done in the done in the course till now, or was not done in the past. So again, those that reflect achievements or innovation which is more than expected, right? So next is, should I add more major achievements at school level? Definitely, it can be done, but again, it should be it should stand apart. It should stand apart a lot from others if they write anything related to their school in their resume. Yeah, next slide, please. Right. How do I balance between exaggeration and understatement? So again, like as Anirudh said before, like you should be somewhat modest here, but not too modest. So because you ultimately have to sell yourself through your resume. So you can get your resume reviewed by friends or seniors who are not aware of your background, like who are not in the same field as you, and then you can get a clear image of how well you have written your resume. Is it somewhat boastful, or is it somewhat underplaying yourself, right? Next, should I include activities to prove that I didn't waste time? Again, like as I said before, don't include all the activities that you have done, but include those which stand apart and you have actually achieved something in them, right? So like focus on excellence and not just enthusiasm. So how detailed should descriptions of projects achievements be? Like it again depends on where you are applying. You will be having various drafts of your resume. Some would be for core, some would be for non-core. So things are like these. Like if you are applying to a core company and you have a technical project, you can actually elaborate it because it would help you in your interviews and things like that in the shortlist too. But again, if you are applying for a non-core job, that technical project should not be very elaborated. So how do I know which skill achievement project can be removed? For this, like you can actually read it from the slides, but apart from this, I would have another suggestion that you should actually inquire from the seniors, from your seniors who have had the experience in the past, who have gone to the company in which you are applying or to the institute. They can tell you better that what actually stands apart in your resume if you are applying for that specific company or that specific institute, and what doesn't. So they can actually tell you that what is essential to have in your resume for that role, right? So these were some FAQs that were in slide. Apart from that, I believe like I have had some other FAQs too. So again, like when is the best time to start preparing for your resume? So I would suggest that whenever you have to apply for a role, start minimum at a minimum 1 month before when you would have to submit your resume, because forming a resume is a very tedious process. It can take like around 4 to 5 days just to prepare an initial draft, right? So like from that initial draft, you have actually have to go to various seniors and get it reviewed again and again. So those reviews also take place, and the final touch up also takes a lot of time, right? So you would if you set aside 1 month for that, it would be a pretty great time and you can come up with a very good resume. Next is that if I'm able to fill only 3/4 of a page, or like I'm not able to fill a whole page, then what should I do? So here there would be some things, like there would be some tricks that you can think of, that you will be applying, like increasing the text size or things like that, but I would not recommend that. You should keep the text size maximum to 10. And apart from that, again, you can think that I will just write a lot of gibberish in any project or any description, right? That would also not work because it would reflect poorly. So even if your resume, even if you are only able to fill 3/4 of a page, it's fine until it's actually credible information about you and credible achievements, right? So and then apart from that, it's like what about coursework? Again, write those courses which are relevant to the position that you are applying, or you can write those courses in which you have got an A star or things like that, right? Where it shows that you are standing out. So this was all. Now I would like just ask Saksham to present the resume that we were going to have. So we will just present you a sample resume that I created for my like when I applied for an internship. So then I would be able to highlight what all stands apart, right? So the resume that you are looking to the left is the one which I prepared for non-core jobs. The right is for the core jobs. So I'm from electrical engineering, so it was for that. If you're not able to view the text, you can actually zoom zoom the screen here. On the right side you would have the controls. So like as you saw in the sample resume, we have the educational qualifications. You have to write these 3 things specifically. So your like BTech or BS, and then class 12, class 10th. Right. So and then in the scholastic achievements part, we have like again it's very self-explanatory. Scholastic achievements mean any educational like achievements that you have had in the institute or before the institute too. So like I written all India rank of JEE Mains and JEE Advanced here. So that was something. And if you like if you don't have a rank in, let's say, under 1,000 or a rank that would not stand out, you can switch to percentiles too. You can write a percentile number which would show that you are standing out, right? Then we can just move on to the internship experience. So till now most of it is similar. So in the internship experience part, we can actually, and in the scholastic achievements too, we can actually look into the all the points that we covered before. So as Saksham told before that, if you can see in the scholastic achievements part, we have used like different action words and have not repeated the same action verbs again and again. So awarded is used 2 times, secured is used 2 times, selected, so things like these, right? And if you want some words to stand out, like some numbers or some things like that to stand out, always you can bold them. Now if I move to internship experience, so this was summer of code. And apart from that, yeah, one thing, sorry, I forgot to mention it before. You should always write the time with which the activity is associated. So with all the achievements, I have mentioned the year because that matters. And apart from that, all the other positions on projects or internship, you have to write the time period for which it was valid, right? Next, you can actually see here the language with which the internship experience part is written, that developed and hosted a web-based application. So what we learned before, that what should your projects or internship experience highlight? Your goal, what you did, how does it helps, like what was it output, what was its output, and how does it actually help people or help the organization for which you were working, and how did you do it, right? So firstly, I mentioned the goal or the final output that was there, developed and hosted a web-based application to streamline the process of like you can read all of that. And in the next point, I written that how, like what did I do and how did I do it, right? Again, like I haven't gone into much detail here because we would also have to cover other points. Next, in the project part, you can see that actually there is a difference between the non-core and the like the core resume. So I have mentioned one more project in the core resume because the number of projects, the more number of projects, the better in your core resume. And apart from that, even if the course was TA 202, we actually did a project related to somewhat related to electrical, and we built actually a machine at the time when machines were not like electrical machines were not built in TA 202, right? So I written the TA 202 course project because it was something which stood out from other projects. And apart from that, like we also won the best project award. So that these are the criteria when you can actually mention a course project, right? Apart from that, like again, so you would think that like the SNT projects that you do. So again, SNT projects are also somewhat mediocre in the sense that like they don't highlight much that you have done because ultimately you did it in your first year, right? So I written this and like what did I do which stood out. So actually what we did was we had a partnership with a factory in Kanpur, and apart from that we won the best social project. So these were some things that stood out, and that's what I highlighted here, right? Apart from that, you can always write the projects that you did under professors. So again, in the project you can see what has been written, the goal, the outputs, and how did you do it. So this is what I have mentioned in the project there. Again, you can also use the type of boxes that we have used here, like in the positions of responsibility, or you can use the bullets. It's not like somewhat mandatory to only use boxes, right? You can use boxes for projects and not for PORs. It's entirely upon you. So again, like the same language that we were following for the projects, we have also used that in positions of responsibility. And apart from that, again, like the quantifying thing that Vatsalya highlighted before, it's a very major thing, and I cannot emphasize it more, that you should always mention numbers wherever possible, right? So like let's say in the projects too, I tried to mention the numbers, but it was not much possible, and wherever it was possible I mentioned it, right? So it can be seen in the positions of responsibilities too. Saksham, can you please scroll down a bit? Right. So yeah, so like after I finish going through the resume, I will also highlight some mistakes that I did, and how you can learn from those mistakes and not do them, right? So these are some things, like in both the cases I written the courses that I have done. So as the right side is for core electrical engineering, I actually written all the core electrical engineering courses that I have done, and not other sort of courses, even if they are not related, right? But in the non-core, I actually return those courses because I have received A star in those courses. So that was something that I highlighted before. Next, we have the skills part. So skills are also somewhat different for both of them, and in the extracurricular activities they are somewhat same, right? In the extracurricular activities also, you can see that I have written those things which actually stand apart, and where I can include some numbers. So as if you can see in the astronomy club first part, so like the 100 plus students, this number has come up, right? Then like back first position, and again in the dramatics also, there are numbers and positions. In the social part also there are numbers. So so you can write extracurricular activities or hobbies that you have had, if you stood apart from others in that field, or if you have some numbers that highlight that you have worked very hard for it, right? So these are some things. Right. So can we include the courses in which we received A grade but not A star? Yeah, definitely you can. Like here I have just mentioned received A star grade for exceptional performance. You can write received A grade for outstanding performance, right? Yeah, so this seems to be a third year resume, but a second year resume would have less info. So no, actually, like this was my second year resume, which I like created just after the second year for the internships in which we sit in the third year, right? So this was actually my second year resume here. Again, so again, like as I said before, if you are able to cover only 3/4 of a page, or like a similar amount, so these are some things, like you can move text size to maximum 10, right? And you can actually elaborate more on the projects that you have done, but not much, right? So as you can see, like the social part, like I was going to highlight some mistakes, right? So in the social part, you can see that I have written 2 bullet points and both of them go in 2 lines. So this is somewhat very hefty to read for someone who is reviewing a resume, and they would actually not go through the points, right? But what they would go through is the things that I have highlighted or any numbers. So what you can do here is that you can actually elaborate more, but you can just bold the stuff that you want to stand out, that you want should stand out, or any numbers that would be there, right? So you can do that. Apart from that, courses will anyway somewhat fill like some part of your resume, right? Apart from that, other mistakes that I can highlight here is that in the positions of responsibility, you can see that somewhere the bullets are not aligned, right? So like there are very specific things that we can point out in a resume, and which like if the recruiter or the interviewer catches that, it actually creates a very bad impression. Because like if someone sees that the bullets are not aligned, or the text font is not like consistent throughout the resume, or let's say the font size is not consistent, it actually is not very aesthetic and would not please the recruiter as such, right? So these are some things. The formatting details are some things that you should look out for every time, because these minute details can actually make or break, right? So these are some things that you would not want formatting details to actually break the process. Right. So these were some things that I wanted to highlight in the resume, and what you can actually do differently in core or non-core or any field that you would want to work in. Right.
Yes, I'll also like to add one point here. So, like your the modeling of triboelectric nanogenerators project, I think similar in both the resumes, right? The details of it. Yeah, so you can also like try to simplify it further for a non-core resume. Like these details might make sense for a core resume, but for a non-core resume, someone might not be able to make sense out of it. Like what does this project is meaning? So you could obviously try to simplify it more. And like the best thing to check whether someone is able to understand that project or not is like maybe you could make your brother or sister read that particular resume, or maybe your parents go through that particular detail, and they may be easily able to tell you whether they are able to it is making sense or not. So try someone who is not from your field to read that project, maybe your friend who is from some other department, or maybe your siblings and all. So they would be easily able to tell whether that particular project is legible or not in the first place. So you can also use this exercise.
Yeah, this was something that I was also going to highlight, but I actually forgot, sorry. So like again, that I said, these were the things that other speakers said previously, that you should not use a lot of technical language in non-core fields, right? So this is a mistake that I made here. So yeah, these are some things. So now we'll take any questions that you guys would have. Right, so we have a question that how do we decide between including first is less impressive projects but relevant to the field, or more impressive ones but irrelevant to the field applying, right? So like you would have got a quite nice example while comparing the non-core and the core resumes. So if you have less impressive projects but they are relevant to the field, you should definitely write them, right? If let's say you have done a core project and you are applying for a core field, you should definitely write it. And it would just giving an example here, I am from electrical engineering. I am applying for electrical engineering position. I have done two projects, one is in economics, one is in electrical engineering, right? You should definitely give more priority to the electrical engineering project first, and then you can actually write the second project only if you have stood out a lot in that. Like if let's say you were able to win some award for it, or like have it in some publication, so things like that. So if something is standing out a lot, then only you should include it in that specific field. Apart from
Point
that,
of
like
advice,
yes,
yes, continue. I'll
no,
add over after that. Sure. So like I was saying that first try to, form all the things that you have and form a master resume in the first place. Like put all the content that you have, that you've done right from the school up till now in the campus. And then maybe you could start on prioritizing based upon the profile part. Like sometimes you might think over such things like whether you should not include this or not, but it might be a case your master resume isn't of one page itself, right? Because you are itself in the second year right now. So you can also first try to complete that master resume, and then move over to the one pager resume for different profiles. So I think that is one point to note here. Yep. So any other questions?
yeah, feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions, or you can again type it in the chat. Right, so what are the questions that the interviewer usually asks related to the projects, right? So this is something that I faced in my internship interview too. So I was actually interviewing for a investment banking position, but I got I got a question from my electrical engineering project. So in that case, you have to tailor your answer accordingly to like where you are applying, in what you are applying. So some questions would be if the project is not related to the field, the question would be just explain me the project, right? And if a question if the position is related to the field, sorry, the project is related to the field that you are applying in, then the questions would be very specific, how did you actually do this, what softwares did you use, what equipments did you use, things like that. And like what were the processes that you used to arrive at a particular output that you achieved. and like what is your project significance, what it actually does. So these are some basic questions that can be asked.
And like if let's say if you're interviewing for a core job and you have a core project itself, so there are a lot of chance that the interviewer might go on that particular topic on the project itself, and you would have a good discussion on the topic itself. So he might ask you questions and concepts from that topic as well.
Yeah, so like remember this thing that the interviews that happen are very continuous in nature. Like one minute you are explaining your project, and then you highlight a specific word. Like if you just let's say example use the word electric field, then the interviewer can skip to an entirely different subject and ask you questions around that specific word that you use or a process that you use, right? So in this manner the interview actually proceeds. Right. So, yeah, Pradeep, this would not be a problem actually. Like 12 score is around 85% and present CPI is 7.5. It will not be a problem.
You just try to get your resume verified from as many seniors as you can, because like there are many details which your seniors might be easily able to catch and you won't be. So just focus on making a resume quickly and getting it verified from as many seniors as you can.
So Prakash, you're doing a project with Dora and then now giving certificate. So you might email him or to Dora at PVF and ask the professor in charge to email it to the STO or ECEL, whatever email is required, even if they're not giving a proper certificate for that. Yeah, you'll get to know how the resume verification is done, what all is expected in consulting roles after the second year. So I think that calls in for another discussion sometime later. But briefly, if we were to say, there were certain slides which talked about things called spikes and peaks in your resume. And I think we'll include them in the master slides that we emailed you guys. So you can have a look.
Right. Raksan asks, as a first year student, should I focus on volunteering, social activities? Is it something worth adding? So the first thing I'd say is that there's nothing which companies especially look for in a resume, right? There is nothing which you need to do to get something done. Apart from like, obviously there are certain cutoffs based on CPA, etc. But doing something for the sake of it, or thinking that companies are looking out for it, is never a good idea, right? Because ultimately, since you have to talk about the stuff you do in your interview, it makes sense if you do things that you're genuinely excited by, etc. But to answer like this specific question, volunteering does have certain credence in firstly adding an extra dimension to your personality, to your experiences, and it does hold a certain value in many different fields, not just in say interviews, but also in say master's programs, etc. So perhaps ask seniors who have done such things to know how it helped them in their process.
Any more
Thank you,
questions?
speakers, for this amazing session. I hope all the students have enjoyed. Please work on your resume to achieve your dream internship. We will soon share the details of registering on the SIP portal. Stay updated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, we'll mail you the slides. Each cell will, I think, mail the slides.
Yeah, sure.